my student teaching experience, I ran across some wonderful teachers who are absolutely amazing with their students. However, I also ran into a couple instances where the teachers I was working with weren't the most respectful towards their students. One time in particular comes to mind. So, I was working with my mentor teacher, and she had had enough. There were two boys in class that were just messing around and kind of not paying attention. She got frustrated. She had the whole class sit quietly, and they got quiet because she was using her assertive tone, and she knew one of the boys personally outside of class. Um, and she looked at the student and said, "If your grandpa was alive right now, he would be ashamed of you." I remember sitting there and hearing that and feeling my heart drop. For those that want to know, I did console the student. I did let my college know. But that lesson taught me something. That moment taught me something. It has been my mission since to not become that quote unquote mean teacher. And so today we're going to be talking into how to stop feeling like a mean teacher when you are holding students accountable, or how to go about it in a way without coming off as mean. So with that being said, let's dive in. One of the first things I want to talk about in regards to how to not be the mean teacher is it's okay to keep students accountable, because when you're keeping students accountable, it does not mean that you're being mean. Sometimes, and here's the thing, students thrive with consistency and systems. Students, sometimes their home life can be unpredictable. And so when you provide a consistent environment for them, they thrive. Students actually most students in my experience crave consistency. And students love to know what the next thing is. So a great example of this, have you ever had students ask what we're doing next, even though it's on the board? They love that consistency. They love having control of their environments slightly. And with that being said, students might push boundaries when they don't feel like their lives are consistent. And the biggest thing is behavior, and the biggest mindset shift, one of the biggest mindset shifts I had to take is behavior is nothing more than communication. You see, students may not be developmentally advanced enough to be able to articulate when they are dysregulated or something is bothering them. They may not have the emotional and social maturity to articulate their feelings to you, so instead they choose to be disruptive or act out. So instead, they act out to test where the new boundary is with you, especially if you haven't been consistent with the one you set with them. So shifting your mindset of keeping students accountable of, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what the expectation is, isn't being mean. In fact, you're actually helping them, because students crave that consistency. They crave those systems. And when they feel like their home life is, maybe not ideal, and maybe things haven't been as consistent lately, they're going to test the boundaries like, well, this didn't, this is how it's supposed to be, but now it's not. Where does this boundary now end? And so reminding students where the boundary isn't being mean, and you can definitely go about it in a positive way without degrading them or calling them out. And we're going to talk more about that next. So that's the first thing. Remind yourself that keeping students accountable and reminding them what the boundary is does not make you mean. It's just letting more students know where that boundary is, because if you never did, students would continue pushing until eventually there's just nothing going on except chaos. So making sure you have that consistent boundary, it's not mean, it's helping students thrive, because the majority of students thrive off of consistency. The second thing, how to hold students accountable with respect and empathy. We just talked about that. You don't necessarily have to do it in a disrespectful way. So the question is, how can you go about keeping students accountable without doing it disrespectfully? Well, here's a couple of different ways I personally in my classroom, not saying if you have ways they're wrong at all, these are just the ways that I use in my classroom. I remind students what the boundaries and expectations are without going about it in a mean way. So the first thing is I like to lead with empathy. I realize now, maybe not so much at the beginning of my journey, but I realize now there's no such thing as bad kids. In fact, most of them are just, when they are partaking in disruptive behavior, they're articulating a lack of something, a lack of a need, a lack of a desire, a lack of a need. There's a want or a need not being met. And so it's my job, whether that's at home and in the classroom, to get to the root cause of that and to give them skills to better articulate when they aren't having a need or want met in the future. So leading with empathy. I like to see students for who they are and not their actions. This was one of the reasons, and I talk about this a lot on the channel, and I'm sorry if you use a clip chart. Totally rational if you do. I personally don't use them, but it was hard for my students to separate their actions and their behavior from the clip chart because it was directly correlated. They moved up, they moved down. They got a certain color if they made good decisions, they moved down, and they were, had certain colors if they didn't follow. And so it was hard for my students to not take their actions personally, and it was hard for me, even as the teacher, to lead with empathy and see students for who they are and not their actions. I was seeing they were doing their actions in spite of me instead of they were doing their actions and I was over here. You see what I'm saying? So that was the first thing, is I started seeing my students for who they are. I make mistakes all the time, but I don't expect anyone to see me for my mistakes. They see me for who I am and who I'm meant to be and who I'm trying to be out in the world, right? So I would get to the bottom of the disruptive behavior with my students. I would say, hey, and I can talk more about this in future content if I haven't already. I'll have to look. I have a lot of content, by the way. Feel free to go check out, whether you're tuning in on the podcast or the YouTube channel. I have over 20 other classroom management videos or podcast episodes, so make sure to check that out. So anyways, so I would sit with my students or stand with them out in the hallway, say, hey, I noticed that this is happening. What's going on? I noticed you're talking in class. What's going on? And I'd get to the root cause. So a problem was hard. Something would happen at home, stuff like that. And I'd be like, thank you so much for telling me. This is the expectation in class. This is what you're doing. Next time when something like this happens, I need you to XYZ. I need you to, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, give me a 3 if you need my help, or if they're shy, something like that, or circle that question and leave it for the end of the day, and I'll come check in with you to see if there's any questions I can reteach you. If there's something going on at home, I need you in the morning to say, hey, pickles, or we'll have a keyword. You pick the keyword, and that lets me know I'm having a bad day. I want to talk about it, and I'll come check in with you. And then remind them what the expectations are, and then move on. So through that conversation, I wasn't degrading who they were as a person. I was getting down to the root cause. Hey, I noticed this. What's going on? And then after I get to the root cause, I recognize and affirm their feelings, and I give them skills and solutions for what they can do instead of being disruptive. And then I hold them accountable and they hold themselves accountable, right? So another thing that you can do is using logical consequences instead of punishments. So I'm going to be honest, this is something that a lot of teachers were doing. I used to take away recess because that's what they were doing and they said that was the way to do it. But students only learned when I took away their recess. It wasn't, I talked in class, I need to stop talking in class. It was, I talked in class, I'm a bad student. Only bad kids don't get their recess. They made that correlation instead of the actual skill. Even if I had a conversation with them, hey, you talked in class, you're missing recess, they still related the two. Oftentimes they would label themselves as the bad kid, and then they come into class and just terrorize the class the rest of the day, if you know what I mean. So when I did that, they would tell them that they're a bad student instead of actually learning what disruptive behavior they chose to do and what they could do better next time. And so here's how you can incorporate logical consequences. I can, again, dive into this more deeply if I haven't already. But for example, if you make a mess, you clean it up. If you're messing around in line, you get to get back and redo the line. If you're talking in class, you get to practice what it should look like, sound like when a teacher's talking. If you are, talking with a neighbor, you get to practice what it should look like and sound like during whole group teaching. If you're messing up in groups, while we do free time, you get to redo your project. If you are being messy with your assignment, you get to redo the assignment. Like, they're correlated with each other instead of, hey, this was the behavior, here's an external choice you're gonna make or do, consequence, therefore telling you you're a bad student. It's, hey, you did this, this is the logical consequence. They're correlated to each other, and that is being then translated into the student's mind. Hey, this equals this, I'm not doing that again. You see what I'm saying? So I'm saying that a lot this episode. I'm not quite sure why. Moving on. Anyways, so that's the second thing. And then the silent conversation. I already talked about this a little bit, but from that story I mentioned earlier, it has been my mission to never, ever, not saying I'm perfect, not saying I don't get frustrated, not saying I haven't messed up, but it has been my mission to never call a student out on their behavior unless it's an emergency or someone's safety is at risk. There have been times where I had to call students out on their behavior because it was an emergency or someone's safety was at risk, and I had to use my, oh man, she's mad, serious, assertive teacher voice to stop, to keep everybody safe. And those are the instances where I will make an exception. So sideline conversations typically go, as I said, what I noticed, I get to the root cause of the behavior, identify the feeling of that student was experiencing. Oh, I noticed you were talking in class because you felt bored. Oh, I noticed you were talking in class because you felt upset about this morning. I reflect that back to them, or you were sad, or you were mad. I reflect it back to them, so it helps them regulate. How many of us adults know when you pretend everything's fine, it's not fine? You can pretend all day, but really it's not until you truly feel that feeling that you can not push through it, but you can experience it, and then that feeling goes away. You have to give that feeling the space it deserves to move on, and that's what I'm doing for my kids. I'm identifying the feeling, recognizing it, and then giving them that space to feel that feeling if it's a safe space and they want to, and then what they were doing that was disruptive. And then I give them skills to better articulate their need or their wants or their desires better next time. That's not being met, and then I give them a logical consequence. Like, you are feeling this, next time let's do this is the behavior because you chose that, you now get to do this. Or next time you do that, you'll choose to do this, whatever it is. And I have levels of proactive classroom management. I'm sure I've either explained that in a previous week or I will in the future, so that's when that comes into play. But essentially during the silent conversation, I'm not calling out a student in front of the class because one, it's degrading to the student, two, it disrupts the class even more, and three, it opens the floor to a power struggle. I would never want a mistake I made as a teacher to be called out during a staff meeting in front of all my peers. Now, if that's happened to you as a teacher, I'm so terribly sorry, but I'm just saying, as a leader, I would never want to do that to my teachers, and I'm going to do my best to never do that to my students. So that's the second thing, is to meet my students with empathy and to go about holding them accountable on their behavior in a respectful and empathetic way. The third thing that I do to not be the mean teacher is I follow strategies that are in alignment. There were many, many practices, and I'm sure if you've tuned into some content on this channel, you've heard me talk about it a lot, but there were many practices in classroom management that were just not in alignment with me when I started my teaching experience. And instead, I started doing what everyone was doing, but it wasn't working for me. It didn't feel great. I felt bad. I felt like a bad teacher. I felt like my students were failing. It just was not working, and I'm wondering what on earth am I doing that is making this not work for me? And then I started listening to which strategies felt right to me and excited to me. And this is how you do this. Your desires are safe guidance. Meaning, the things you want to do in my whole experience, whether that's been teaching or life in general, the things I want to do end up being the thing that makes it happen. The things that I feel like I have to do, or should do, or need to, often aren't the things that get me the thing, if you know what I mean. So, your desires are safe guidance. Back then, I should have done clip charts. I should have called students on their behavior in class. I should have taken their recess away, but it didn't feel aligned to me. So I had a point where I said, enough's enough. I'm doing what I want to get to the classroom I want. And instead, I used proximity. I walked around my classroom, and that made most of the disruptive behavior stop. I called out 3 students. I'm going through proximity right now, what I do. I called out 3 students who are following expectations. I leaned into classroom procedures and used them heavily in my class. I rely on that more than calling out my students or positive rewards in my class. I pull them for silent conversations. This is what I noticed. This is behavior. This is failing. Here's, another skill we can do. Let's come up with a solution. Off we go. Logical consequence. All those things. And sure, eventually I added like a super improver wall, stuff like that, but that wasn't it. I let go of the things I should be doing, and I started doing the things I wanted to do. So whether that's here on this channel, where you're tuning in from, or another person who's talking about classroom management, whether that's someone online, a coworker, an admin, a professor, whatever. Whenever you hear a piece of advice, and not even classroom management, I'm talking teaching, money, professional, all of it. If it feels like I feel guilty, like I should be doing that, but I'm not, stop listening to them. Ask yourself, if that were not true, what would I want to do instead? If nobody could judge me, what would I do instead? Do that. Do that. If I could give you any piece of advice from how many years am I at now? 28, 21, 7 years of teaching, do that. Do that. You'll get to where I finally got so much faster, or where you want to go so much faster if you start listening to yourself and trusting yourself. So anyways, rant over. The more I followed my gut on the strategies that felt right to me and excited to me, the less mean teacher I became, because I started doing things that felt aligned and started doing things that made me feel good. And if I felt good, it made my students feel good. And if it made my students feel good, it made my classroom feel good. And when it made my classroom feel good, disruptive behaviors went down. I almost said it again. Trust who you are. Trust your gut. Trust your judgment. You don't need to question every decision you're making. You are the professional. I know it's scary. I know you're constantly judging yourself. I know you're wondering, are you cut out? Is this enough? Am I doing enough? I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I love you. Please stop. Please stop. Listen to yourself. One step at a time. Once a day, ask yourself, what do I want to do? What's a strategy I would like to do? Not what I should do, but what I want to do, and lean into that. Let's wrap up this week's content. So overall, there are several ways to stop feeling like a mean teacher when holding students accountable for their behavior. Step number 1, keeping students accountable does not make you mean. It shows them where the boundaries are. And boundaries are like the fence to the house. Students do better when they know where the edge of the property is or where the edge of the room is. Same thing. They do better when they know where the boundaries are. If you're consistent with them, it's not being mean. It's saying, hey, here's the safe zone. Go play. It's safe. Have fun. And they're not questioning whether or not things are safe because the boundary is constantly moving. They know their little playpen to play. Or if you're an older kid, the recess where the boundaries are to go have lunch with their friends, essentially, is what I'm saying. Second thing, how to hold students accountable with respect and empathy. I tried my mission to always lead with respect and empathy. I show my students the same respect that I expect from them, and I hold them accountable, and I lead with empathy when they're not following the expectations. When I make a mistake, there's often a reason. People don't often set out to make the world a worse off place. There's typically a reason and a thought process behind why they did that. So it's my job as a teacher to get to that root cause and help them navigate the world a little better. Because each time I do that, I guaranteed most of the time that student learned and they had skills now and they did better and they didn't have to continuously make that decision and learn from that every time. All right. Third thing, following strategies that are in alignment. Stop listening to the rest of the world. Trust you. What strategies are you seeing that you're actually excited about? Last week, I talked about the top 3 mindset shifts that I took in order to go from struggling with classroom management, literally was labeled the worst class in the school, to now training subs in the district. How did I get there? That's how. So make sure to check out last week's content if you haven't. And I specifically dive into some of the strategies that I use that are more in alignment and some of the shifts I made to get more in alignment. So make sure to check that out. All right, here are next steps if you want to dive in a little more to this classroom management topic. First off, wherever you're tuning in from, I guarantee I have a ton of classroom management content. So make sure to go dive into those if you feel aligned to me and how I tend to perceive classroom management. Second thing, I've been asked a fair amount of classroom management questions in my time. So I compiled a guide that answers the top 10 interview classroom management questions I get asked. The most common ones, like how do you deal with a chatty class? How do you deal with students who are constantly out of their seats? All of those, I took those top questions, made content for them. I'm talking podcast episodes, blog post episodes, YouTube videos, and I answered them more in depth. So if you see a question in the index, chatty class, answered on page 6, you go to that, read my answer. You want a further explanation, you can click to those podcast episodes, blog posts, YouTube channel videos to get a further explanation to how I run my class. So I really love that resource, honestly. It saves a lot of time and sifting through the internet. So my gift to you, it's free. Make sure to check that out in the description down below. Second thing, there's been a theme lately with classroom management. And so I really want to do a free 3-day event on classroom management where I go into depth on strategies that I use in my classroom for classroom management. It is free. If you are watching this after the event was live, you can still enroll and I will send you the replays. So I'm talking actual practical stuff. And what I like about these is, honestly, if I were to go on, I think like an hour, total of 3 hours of trainings on classroom management on this channel where you're tuning in, I don't think it'd do very well. But if I have a place where I'm answering questions about classroom management, having a conversation with you in a community, then I feel like that's going to be a much better place to do that with, because there's a lot of give and take. So if that's what you are wanting and you want to see what other teachers are asking me for classroom management and you want to join, make sure to check out the description. Again, it's free. If it's past the time when at the end of the month is when this is happening, if it's past the time of that event, still make sure to check that out because I will send you the replay. Third thing, I, as a teacher, pieced together so much of my classroom management strategies. It drove me a little crazy. I really wish a teacher would have been like, here's everything I do, go nuts. I made that because it started with coaching teachers who wanted specific resources from me. So I tweaked them, made them a little prettier. I made them into 5 different themes because I'm a theme girly and I'm from elementary school, so we like our themes. And I sent them out to the teachers I was coaching, and then eventually I had this big, huge pile of them. I just wrapped them up, put them in a bow, and I sent them off to you. What I like about this is you can sift through all my resources for ideas. You can look at these resources as inspiration. You can look at these ideas to get a really good idea on how I run my classroom because you're literally looking at the resources. And maybe you have one or two things that you already have strong, but there's a couple things in there you want to grab. You can do that too. You don't need the whole thing. So make sure to check that out because honestly, it's going to save teachers. It does save teachers tons of time. I really wish past like right now me could go back to first year teacher me and say, here's all the stuff that you're going to use in the future. Go nuts. I would have saved like 4 years, 3 years. So definitely check that out. All right. So that wraps up how to go about being good at classroom management without being the mean teacher. As always, remember we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, teacher bestie. Bye.